Hello and welcome to the viewing and listening audience to this, the 9th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. This committee is hearing with stakeholders with the responsibility for cybersecurity pursuant to its examination of the government's ongoing response to the recent cyber attacks on state bodies and entities or in which the state has an interest. Members of the public are invited to submit their comments and questions via this Parliament's social media platforms, YouTube channel ParlView, or via its Facebook and or Twitter platforms. Today we're very happy to have before us the Minister of Digital Transformation, Senator the Honourable Hassel Bacchus, and his team from the Ministry of Digital Transformation. Honourable Minister, good afternoon and thank you for joining us today. Can we have your ministry team introduce themselves, please?
Good day and thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the members of the committee for allowing us the opportunity to appear before you today on this quite pertinent topic. I will start with my right with the Permanent Secretary.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Corey Belfon, Permanent Secretary Acting, Ministry of Digital Transformation.
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm Devendra Ramnarayan, Digital Transformation Advisor to the Minister and to the Ministry of Digital Transformation.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I am Denise White, one of the Deputy National Chief Digital Officers at the Ministry.
Good afternoon, Chair. This is Leon Wessels, also one of the Deputy National Chief Digital Officer at the Ministry of Digital Transformation.
Later on in this session, we'll also have the officials of the Trinidad-Tobago Cyber and Social Media Unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and also officials of the Cybersecurity Incident Response Team of the Ministry of National Security. At this time, I'd like members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting with Member Mohit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. President, good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to all of you joining us, Minister and team, Member Mohit, and good afternoon to all members. We do look forward to your contributions here today and discourse.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Honourable Minister and team from the Ministry of Digital Transformation. I am Avinash Singh, a member, and I do look forward to a very productive session today. Thank you.
I am the committee's chair, Paul Richards, and we have a member joining us as we speak. Member Naked, good afternoon. We're introducing ourselves, so you're just in time. Yes, we're live.
Good afternoon, everyone. David Naked, member. Nice to have all of you here. Minister.
And the other members of our committee could not be with us this afternoon, but of course they support us nonetheless. We have some wide areas of discussion today. The issues the committee intends to explore during the hearing include the level of information and communication technologies ICT support the Ministry of Digital Transformation currently provides to ministries, departments, and agencies of the state, the level and type of cybersecurity systems and infrastructure that are required to more effectively protect the state public asset and combat digital vulnerabilities within the public sector. 3, the human and technical resource deficits that are affecting the government's ability to effectively prevent and or respond to cybersecurity breaches, the possible regulatory and legislative provisions that can be made to more effectively protect our state and public assets and combat digital vulnerabilities within the public sector. And 5, the status of the proposed cybersecurity strategy and the extent of protection it is intended to provide. We are happy to be able to acknowledge written submissions of the Ministry of Digital Transformation, which was first received on Friday, December 8th, and resubmitted with edits on Saturday, December 9th. At this point, I'd like to welcome the Honourable Minister Bacchus, Minister of Digital Transformation, to make a brief opening remark. Minister.
Thank you again, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, again for giving us the opportunity to speak on this, like I said, very common and very current topic. The Ministry of Digital Transformation is but one part of the whole of state and government mechanism that is designed to work within this space. And you would have mentioned a number of other areas of state that will appear before you to deal with other parts of what they do. But the I guess the opening thing I want to say is that the cybersecurity is something that I think the whole country must take seriously. It's not a matter for just the government, it's a matter for all of us. All of us are at risk of having some part of what we do, particularly as we live so much of our lives online, being interrupted or disrupted by illegal and threat actors who want to do things that are not in contravention or not in alignment with our initial intentions. So we're going to talk a bit about today, and I have the entire team here with me who can speak to that. It's about what the government has been doing, what we think should be done, all the stakeholders that should be involved, and in some ways, some of the things that everyone can do in an effort to protect themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Just to give us some context, of course, the world went online more fervently during the COVID-19 pandemic, and certainly many of the aspects of going online remain with us. The world has moved certainly to such a significant level of digital enterprise. Most recently, we've had acknowledgements from the Ministry of Health right here in this committee about a breach in San Fernando. We've had information from the Honorable Attorney General about a breach at the Ministry of Legal Affairs in the Office of the Attorney General. We've had the TSTT issue recently. In the private sector, we know of Massey. I read something about Blue Waters even earlier on today. So, I mean, if we don't prepare ourselves adequately as a country, both public and private sector, we will be executing a dereliction of duty. Just to give some context to the audience, I was able to get my hand on two significant documents. One is titled The New Frontier of Cybersecurity, Emerging Threats and Innovations Out of India by Dakash Dev, Prakush Argawal, and Dirut Kut, among others. And I'll just quote some interesting data points from this one and the other one in terms of the types and trends of cyber threats and occurrences that have happened and the projections all the way from 2015 to 2022. And they span fraud intrusion, fraud, spam, denial of service, cyber harassment, vulnerability reports, intrusion attempts, malicide or malicious code, and content-related intrusions. And between 2015, there were, and this is in millions, 9.097 attacks. 2016, it went up to 10.35. 2017, 11.298. 2018, 13.118. 2019, 14.473. 2020, 16.854. 2021, 18.508. And by 2022, it had more than doubled in terms of the global attacks in those areas. What was also quite interesting to me, which is part of the reason why your team is here with us, the main drivers are identified in a document titled Cyber Attacks, Trends, Patterns, and Countermeasures by Andrea Bendowski from the Presidia Economics and Finance Journal, is that the main drivers, the root cause of security breaches, less than 50% of these cases are due to criminal intended attacks, the causes being split between three factors: intended attack, human error, and system vulnerabilities. And they give an interesting pie chart as to the top 20 targets percentage-wise. And the number one target, 42.21%, is government and state assets. Second was single individuals, persons. Third was education. Fourth was news. Fifth was political parties, organizations. Sixth was law enforcement. Seventh was military. 8 was industry and food and retail. And 9 and 10 were forum and health, which kind of puts the state in the firing line. And this is since 2017. We could imagine how much that has evolved by now. So if you could give us a sense, as we start, of what your assessment is as Minister of Digital Transformation as to how prepared Trinidad Tobago's public sector is, one, proactively, and two, to respond to incidents of cyber attacks.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It's the information you cited is and you could choose pretty much any source you want. It would be deemed as fairly accurate. And that is really because of the threat landscape in which governments find themselves. Now, let me just add a little context to that. Prior to the significant utilization of ICT in the delivery of government services, ICT was always used for a number of other things. Delivery of government services kind of came late in the game, particularly in the Caribbean region. And so attacking governments really had to do with disrupting them from the point of they're not able to perform their required duties of state. What has happened as time has evolved and industry has changed, now significant amounts of the infrastructure of state is controlled by ICT systems. Significant amounts of the way in which you transact almost anything that you do in the government is controlled by some level or involves some level of ICT usage. And unfortunately, the security component of that wasn't necessarily built in at the time when the services were being developed or increased. So what you have is this large capacity to execute things and a lesser capacity to defend them. The threat actors would know that. A number of the threat actors come from the industry. So what happens is that governments become very soft targets. Private organizations, because of so much of their lifeblood being part of, or being their ability to continue to exist, really relies on safe utilization of ICT technology. They were a bit ahead. Banks would be the best example of it. Probably the most secure of the ICT industries that they have would be banks. And so to get the culturalization of cybersecurity into state is not a simple task. It not only involves getting the ICT professionals up to speed, but getting the management of anything up to speed. Cybersecurity is not an IT problem. It never was. Cybersecurity is an enterprise risk problem to be managed at that level. It's not the ICT guys, not the IT guys have to look at it. It's in the boardrooms, etc. And so as various ministries, divisions, and agencies move forward with their digital agendas, add more digital technology to their portfolios, use it more in what they do, the attack surface that they have increases. And if we are not able, and we as the ministry, the CSIRT from the Ministry of National Security, a number of places, if we are not able to convince those people of the requirements and the relevance of having robust cybersecurity strictures in their operations, we're going to be in some trouble. And as far as that goes now, I think the sensitization of it has happened. But to transform from having what you would think to be fairly routine cybersecurity prevention methods and recovery methods available to you to what is actually required in modern day to what we have now, some of which we expounded in the document we sent, we're not there yet. Certainly not there. Means we're not there is that some ministries would be better protected than others. The work we just did at the Ministry of Attorney General Legal Affairs, for example, there would be one of the more secure environments that you have. Coming out from a successful attack, when the interventions were made, it wasn't just about finding out what happened. It wasn't just about removing the threat. It involved then hardening the environment, increasing the security levels of awareness, scanning the dark web for additional credentials that may have been in existence, putting in automated technology to look at the environment, identify threats, and take proactive actions, and so on. All of that speaks to why that environment is now in that case. That will not be what I would call universally applied across the state at all. That has to happen. Things of that nature has to happen, prioritized across, and when I say prioritized across the ministries that have critical importance for the existence of state. I say that meaning the Ministry of Finance is an important one, for example. Think about what would happen if customs stopped working. While that is an extreme example, if you look at where member is from in the Ministry of Agriculture, the impact of not having farmers being able to register for 2 weeks is not the same impact. So when you look at it from that perspective, we have to prioritize the ministries, identify their current cybersecurity readiness, and then based on that, take the appropriate actions to get them to where they need to be. Very few of them.
Well, just as you say that, before I go to Member Mohit, how much has this incident in the Ministry of the Office of the Attorney General and legal affairs put the state on guard? And are they a priority? Is there a priority listening? Because you say we have to, implying that it has not yet been done. Is it an ongoing process?
It has to be an ongoing process because the threat actors change their modus operandi all the time. You just identified a number of ways in which they tend to infiltrate organizations. Primarily what we have happening in the Caribbean and in Trinidad being no different. It is basically what they're trying to do is to infiltrate your network. Either they take control of it and you no longer have control of it, or do that as well as exfiltrate data, which they then hold for ransom and ask you to pay for. All of which is meant to disrupt what you do. And so most agencies, for example, if you think typically, will say, listen, I have a firewall, and it's a managed firewall by some company, and they believe that that is sufficient for what they have. And that thinking may have been so in 2017. It certainly doesn't apply today. And so I am not putting any illusions on anyone. The absolute readiness of the state across all ministries, divisions, and agencies is not there yet, and that's what we're working towards getting done.
Member Mohit. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thanks for your very honest statement, Minister. But it's a serene indictment of what happened at TSTT, no? When you say that it's not an IT problem, but it comes from the boardroom. Where do we go from there? Just a brief, given that whole mess that took place there.
I certainly wouldn't be able to comment specifically on what happened in the TSCT or TSCT raw rooms. My comment is one I think that will be universally accepted, which is that cybersecurity is not an IT issue. IT happens to be the conduit or where the technology or where the technical resource lies in terms of your ability to address what is happening at the time. But the policies, the cementing of the strategy, the changing of the culture, the implementation of the HR requirements, the ensuring that the contracts associated with the people who you engage to manage your security and things, all of those things don't sit with IT, they sit within board.
Comes from the boardroom.
Every organization that I know of, when you look at any organization that utilizes significant ICT, if you look in their top 5 enterprise risks, cybersecurity is in there, which means that they have some portion of what they're doing allocated to addressing that. That includes specific portions of their revenue, their maintenance budgets. It includes specific areas of HR. A number of things that can only happen at the executive management level of.
So it's not only the guard at the front door.
It's not there. Yeah. It's certainly not the guys there alone.
Member Mohit, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Minister, based on what you've just said, we don't see much direct responsibility by your ministry in terms of the all-of-government approach as it relates to the strategy, because you're saying that you are not there yet.
Saying that we're not there yet doesn't mean that no work is not being done. The strategy is important. And out of the strategy, things will happen, policies, etc. But while all of that is going on, the threat remains and the threat is real. So the readiness, the getting people ready, getting ministries in a position where they can react if something happens and so on, the ministry is doing that. But at the same time, a global strategy that we can say we're implementing these policies across all ministries, that is still being developed. But the tactics of how we will address if an issue happens at any ministry, division, and agency is known.
So how much direct responsibility you would say your ministry has?
Responsibility for?
In terms of the strategy and interventions when it comes to cyber attacks, etc., within the various MDAs.
So that's a shared responsibility now between this ministry and the Ministry of National Security. The CISO team, which will come before you, they have been working on a strategy now since, anybody could tell me? It's been a while, about 2011, 2014, thereabouts, that they've been working through a number of pieces for that. So ultimately, the strategy will happen, and you build that strategy by using best practices or good practices from other places, and you put it into what you have and culturalize it for your environment. That is happening, and we're sharing that. We know where we want to go where that is concerned. But in terms of the sequence of things, we can't wait for the strategy to be completed before we put guards at the door. And that's what we've been able to do, and that is what the ministry has been at the forefront of, putting guards at the door so that when and if, and it's a question of when. If people want to get into your networks, they will. So it's not just about preventing people getting in. What happens when they do? What is your service resilience capability, etc.? Those are the things that the ministry is trying to enforce across all the ministries, divisions, and agencies. They're just not all at the same level. Some are better than others.
Minister, has your ministry been able to conduct an assessment or any type of forensic investigation of the recent cyber attacks against the the IT systems and networks at ministries? And if so, can any preliminary findings and conclusions be shared with the committee and the public at large?
One of the, particularly Mr. Wessels is here, and this speaks to the level of the way in which we are treating with cybersecurity at the ministry. There are only 4 of people of this senior level that we have. Mr. Wessels is one that is dedicated entirely to cybersecurity. So these are the most senior people that we have, technical people in the ministry. So they are there. Any cyber attack that is successful, or even ones that are not successful, at some point in time, Mr. Wessels and his team will be involved in what is happening there. Some things are simply easier to do than others. In terms of forensics of what has happened, the one at the Ministry of Attorney General and Legal Affairs, we were most directly involved in it. We practically managed the entirety of that process from beginning to end. The one that prompted this chair through you is the one at the Southwest Regional Health Authority. The CSIRT handled that one, and they can give you even more details of it. What conclusions can we draw? Well, I guess it will be the same anywhere. There's still not a high enough understanding of personal responsibility in cybersecurity spaces. I think people still do bad things, like changing their password back to the same password they've been using for the last 5 years, like not employing strong password technology, like not safeguarding their own credentials and by sharing them with other people. Simple things like that can cause it. Other things are a bit more intense than that, not having some of the basic, what I would call basic tools that should be there to protect your networks, EDRs, XDRs, modified firewall rules, etc. Those things are not present in all of them, and we've seen that. And the other thing that we've also noticed, and we've been through our own people going into the dark web and finding significant credentials for active members of state in the dark web, which means if, Chair, for example, if you happen to have credentials to log into the Parliament, if we go into the dark web and look for it and search to see if you have your credentials there, it should not be, but we keep finding every time we go in active members of state with their credentials living in the dark web. And when we investigate some of it a lot of times, it's because they just simply apply bad practices.
How extensive is that? And are the actors turning out to be the same actors or different actors?
A lot of the threats that we've had here, Leon, you want to comment on that? There would have been, I know of at least 2 major players that are here. You want to?
Yes, so there's a variety of different actors right now in play. It's just some of them have different approach. Some of them will actually come in, hold your data ransom, and you will have to pay them a ransom in order for you to have access to your data. Some of them will actually exfiltrate your data, use that as leverage for negotiation. Some of them will actually, if you decided not to pay the ransom, they'll do customer shaming. They will actually call some of your partners or some of your customers. They will actually indicate that they have access to your data. Here is it, and just to force you to pay the ransom. So it's a combination of different players in the market, and most of them are well established. They have different motivations, the way they're doing it. Some for political reasons, some are driven by money, etc.
Are they local actors or international actors?
Most of these are internationals.
Yeah, we found that most of them, and some of them are very well known. RansomX, which executed the one at Southwest Lockbit, which we know, but there are various imitators of them as well, which we've also found and gotten inside of it. It is one of the key things that we've also found is that there is significant resistance with staff as it relates to when you add some of the more stringent security measures that we can put in, meaning that it becomes inconvenient. It's not as simple, well, if I just do this, then I can get into my data and I can work, I can do this from anywhere, etc. When you start adding layers of security on top of that. For you to be able to do the things that you could do with one keystroke, now you have a number of things that you have to secure to identify yourself, for example. And not everyone is on board with that, and it can create significant issues in the workplace.
Member Mohit.
Minister, I note your response in terms of the 4 senior persons at your ministry. Can you indicate to the committee whether the ministry is operating at full capacity in terms of staffing, financial resources, and even technical support?
The ministry itself has a cabinet-approved structure that is being filled out. We were operating on a transitional, well, on a temporary structure before. We're in the process now of filling out that structure. So it's a question of recruiting people. It's interesting, as you mentioned, that in terms of security, we did, Devendra, you remember that? We did interviews, or we put out vacancies for people to come into our security part of the infrastructure. A couple of things happened. One, we couldn't find a number of qualified people. And obviously, if you find the real qualified people, they won't work for government salaries, if you consider what you're dealing with in the cybersecurity space. So we recognized initially, even from the onset, that we don't have enough cybersecurity professionals here, and this is just for the ministry. Think about that being expanded across all of Trinidad and Tobago, all of the private sector, et cetera, et cetera. It is that. So we're working towards what we're doing. Funding has never been an issue for the ministry from my operations of it. We've always tailored our programs to be in alignment with the allocations that we can receive, and we have no deficiency where that is concerned. As far as, well, like I said, people, we're bringing them in under filling the permanent things which we have to do under the commissions as prescribed by law. Other people, we're bringing them in under contract, and we have some short-term people that we're transitioning into new roles as well. So we're working on that. We're getting there.
Member Mohit asked about an assessment or audit of the number of ministries that would have had attacks. Can you share with us how many attacks are, in a general sense, state agencies or ministries receive on a daily or weekly basis?
I know we have that information, but the CSIRT will have the most up-to-date and accurate information. So when they appear later, we will just repeat what they tell us.
No problem.
If you want to look at it from that. That was where the repository would be.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable Minister, I took note of what you indicated about the fact that this cyber attack risk mitigation spans across not just the operational level of entities, but also the decision is really made at the top executive levels. But coming from a ministry perspective, does the ministry conduct any public education campaigns designed to boost the level of public awareness about cybersecurity threats and their associated risks?
Yeah, so again, it might be a cliche thing to say, but it's a whole of government thing. The sensitization of, for example, the entirety of the public service is something we would do in conjunction with the Ministry of Public Administration. If we target the technical teams, the PS will tell you that he has been there, you've been there many times, speaking at the PS forum, the DPS forum, etc., working on sensitizing those people in terms of what, and that is on the high level we have of the technical teams. GLAC. We have that, we speak to them there as well. So in the ministry, we tend to do that, and then individually between the ministries, divisions, and agencies, they will continue that. You have similar things happening at iGov, similar things going on with that. The Telecommunications Authority is also quite active in trying to promote those things. And you see a lot of it happening, but people are very self-aware. I mean, one of the things, I don't know if there's anybody you could ask in Trinidad and Tobago, if they're not aware of the threats and the things that can happen to them relative to using electronic devices, whether that be phones or otherwise. We will continue to work with that. We partner with international agencies to do it. We've worked with the IDB. We're working with the Andean Bank now with CAF. We'll continue to do that. But the thing really has to happen at an individual realization level. And we're going to continue to push that.
Chair, through you, as the Honourable Minister responded in terms of the international bodies, that leads me to my next question. Minister, I recall in your budget presentation, Budget 2024, you mentioned that there are several regional bodies tasked with creating policy and best practice for network and cybersecurity. Would you mind sharing some of these bodies with us? And also, what are the benefits of these partnerships and the policies derived from these organizations?
We have lots. So Ms. White could tell you a lot about them, but we have quite a number of them. All of the, I can't think of a single international agency that we work with that doesn't have a significant focus on cybersecurity. The ITU, the CTU, CTO, all of the financial institutions that I just spoke to, which includes the IDB, the Andean Bank, our relationships that we have, country-to-country relationships with, where we have a memorandum of understanding signed with them, the Estonians, which are quite good at this, India, which is quite good at it. I mean, it's every institution that you have that we work with, whether that be from the telecoms or from the IT space, has a significant IT component to it. And all of them ascribe, the European Union, all of them will have either some frameworks, handbooks, policies that they're all available to you to use once you adapt them to your particular place. Ms. White, who is responsible for policy at the ministry, will tell you that we've been working on a number of them and trying to adapt them to where we are and looking at some of the pros and cons of them. There are very few of them that you can simply wholesale lift and apply in the Trinidad and Tobago context. It's dangerous, and it's dangerous from the point of view that you're using first world policies across the board in a country that is not necessarily built to operate in that way. And so we have to make the necessary changes, put the right checks and balances inside, temper it in some cases simply because it just can't do that. And of course, on the legislative side, some of the things that we would want to do legislatively as a state would require special majorities, which we don't currently exist. We simply don't have them in the parliament, and we've not been able, in some cases, to get the support that we need to make those things happen. So we work within the confines that we have, and we manage our way around it. But all the agencies that we deal with have very significant, and have offered in all cases, to assist us in what we're doing in our cybersecurity thrust.
Thank you, Minister. Chair, with your leave also, Minister, you mentioned the current partnership with India. I would like to get a little bit of details in terms of the parameters of this current partnership with India. And if you can share with this committee what the country can look forward to as benefits from that particular project.
If through you, Chair, I'd like to ask Devendra if you could, please, you could elaborate specifically on that.
Thank you, Minister. So our partnership with India is covered by a memorandum of understanding which was signed in August of this year. And the idea here is to tap into the experiences of India in a number of areas. So the area of identity management, the use of identity management for managing social benefits distribution, the use of open source software, the capabilities that India has with respect to software development and certifying and standardizing the way software is done. There's a group of software which they call the India Stack. They have offered that to us, and in there are a whole range of applications that we can take and customize and tailor for our country. In so doing, we can fast track it, and we know that it's fairly reliable. But what we will get out of that arrangement is the policy support, and the advantage of dealing with a country and not necessarily with a company is that they speaking the same language as us. They're going to give us advice on why we did things, what is the strategy, what worked, what didn't work, what lessons we learned, what you should do and what you should try and avoid. They also don't have an agenda. So the ability to get software that we can utilize, getting access to the technical people, getting access to the training, again, it doesn't necessarily come with any strings attached. They're doing it because it's something that's a valuable product that they want to extend. So what we have on our immediate plans, and I believe the Minister would have given some direction to move ahead, would be to get some support, including on cybersecurity, and to get, for example, some review of the capabilities within our ministry and our sister agency, iGovTT, to come up with a plan of action to strengthen that capability, to look at the software quality assurance process within our ministry and from a policy side and from iGovTT so that we could produce better quality software, and to come up with a plan of action to raise that to an acceptable level. It's decent now, but to raise it to a level where it starts to become close to where India is at. It involves training, a substantial amount of training. and including the ability to train in mass. So some of the programs which include videos and other things that you can reach out to citizens, so start sensitize them on digital hygiene and what they need to do, we'll get some of that. And some very particular pieces of software that we want to utilize, including wallets that will allow you to store wills, will allow you to store birth papers, etc., so that you don't have to walk around with paper. So there are a whole range of things that we have had approval to, which we're going to pursue.
If I could just, are there timelines in those projects, one? And how is it impacted? Minister, earlier on you mentioned that different ministries and different agencies are at different levels of compliance and resilience. And as the old adage goes, a chain is as strong as its weakest link, particularly when you are as interconnected as ICT. How is that, those differentials in resilience and readiness impacting the whole of government approach to cybersecurity in the country?
All right, so the first one, yes, there are timelines surrounding these things. What is, I think, really important to note is that there are some foundational projects upon which a lot of these things are being built. One being the interoperability project that we have, probably the most important fundamental project we have. What that is designed to do is to create a safe, secure, resilient network that allows for the validation and verification of information across ministries, well, the relevant information, so that services can be provided to the public. Why is that important? Well, it's important from the point of view that I don't know of any, I can't think of any service that you can have that starts in one ministry and ends in the same ministry without having to go anywhere else. One of the most important things that you have to do is just to validate that you're an actual person, that you're alive and you're living, that you're here. So that network is really key and a foundational element of what we're doing now. We have, the Estonians are working with us with that. They've been here for a significant amount of time. We had a test plan for
later this week
to validate that all of that work has culminated in the ability to exchange and validate information across the ministries. So that is happening. The timelines that surround everything else is really built around a duration. And a duration means that if you know when it starts, we can tell you when it's going to end. Once the foundational piece is built, the pace at which services get built on top of that actually is quite rapid. And we have the experience of that being what has happened in the Bahamas. They use similar technology from Estonian companies and have built their exchange networks that way. And they're able to roll out services in very, very quick times. I mean, in orders of weeks, once that piece is complete. So that's where we are with that. So everything really has a timeline and a duration. The other thing to note, of course, is that we're using agile methodology in what we're doing. It's not the traditional waterfall method. What that means is that we will create our things, put them into space. Even when launched, wouldn't have full capabilities, but as the other revisions come out, those things happen. Traditionally, we won't put something into the market unless every single thing that you want it to do is available. That's not the way we're going to do these things. So that's one piece. So that deals with the timelines. The second piece you asked, sorry, Chair.
Because you mentioned earlier on several factors. One, a lack of trained personnel at a particular high level, the different levels that ministries are in terms of resilience and training and responsiveness, and how that affects the whole of government approach in terms of the vulnerability that is posed by one ministry that may not be as resilient as another, but they're interconnected in terms of sharing information.
Right, so that is one of the reasons why that particular network is so important and the way it works, and the fact that, so the ministry has some very specific guidelines that I have put in. One of them is security by design. It's not a bolt-on. So we're not going to build something and then try to put the security on top of it. As it's being built and designed and implemented, the security is a key and straight component with that inside of it. That's why that interconnecting network is so important. It has inherent in it a number of the securities that security features that are required as it relates to exchange of information and thus the propagation of threat actors' ability to get into places. But more importantly than that, the major network on which the government lives is something we have called GovNet. And GovNet is called GovNet. And it is probably one of the most secure networks that we have. We mentioned it in the documentation. You can have a look at it. And there are reasons why that is so. It's deployed, the majority of the infrastructure lives within tier 3 data centers, very secure environments. They have a number of rules and policies that are set inside of it that protects it. I don't know of any GovNet function that we have, implementation that we have that's been hacked. I don't think we have any evidence of that. What you do have in ministries are a number of standalone pieces. So this room would be an example I would give. If all of us sitting here happen to be GovNet, that's fine, we're well protected. And if everyone else sitting out there has their own independent network, but it lives within the ministry, those are the networks that tend to get attacked because they don't live within the protection of what GovNet provides. It will be a number of servers there to provide a specific function. And so those are the ones that are easier to get to because they don't have the policies and the protections involved. Yes, it does create an issue, but the idea we have is to do a couple things. One of our other flagship projects is that we're building a Tier 4 data center. Tier 4 is the highest level of security and operational functionality that you can have in a data center. So we're building a Tier 4 data center here in Trinidad and Tobago. And the plan is to anchor our services there. It is not meant to remove everything from the other. We have 5 Tier 3 data centers in Trinidad that are quite secure and work well. The intention is to incorporate all of them for the government's use. The government uses them even today. But the idea is to have government-owned, government-operated Tier 4 data center here to allow for the removal of a number of these standalone, independent, and as such more vulnerable systems that we have. A number of regional governments have also expressed the interest in having some of their data sit within the walls and confines of our data center, as well as, of course, the migration of services from individual ministries, divisions, and agencies into that kind of thing. So it just gives you an idea of the evolution of what we're doing. We have to protect what's out there, but the intent is to move it away from being in that vulnerable state.
Thank you. Member Nakid.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, just based on what Mr. Ramnarayan said, he listed all the benefits of that MOU with India. Then it begs the question, why only that MOU coming on board in August of this year? Why not before?
Yeah, I was telling somebody that recently that if you take a poll around the room and you talk about technology and a country that you're going to get technology from, I'm not sure India will come first to mind except for the well-learned. People will go to places like the United States, like Canada. We're kind of Western-looking way in which we do it. The foundational elements of what we were doing obviously was coming from, in this case, we were getting the interoperability network from Estonia. And that MOU has existed for some time. We're operationalizing that now. But one of the good things about having a team as talented as I have is that we continuously scour the international landscape for places and areas where we can work. India should have been a more natural fit for us. One, the natural history that we share. Two, they follow exactly the same doctrine we want. Build things on open source software so that the costs are reduced. And more than that, you control it. They've walked that walk. The thing about India, and I mean, while we were there, we met with 7 ministries. 7 different ministries. We were there. I was there for 10 days. He was there for a bit longer. And in all cases, everything that they offered to us, 1 came at little or no cost, if any at all. 2, it was built on open source software. 3, we could have picked it up and brought it with us if we wanted to. And they offered all the things that he said. Why we went there at this hour is because we ended up there through commonality of an alignment of goals. We wanted a specific type of e-identity system, for example. They had the technology that will address the way we wanted to do it. Couldn't find it in many places. In exploring that, we ended up finding the other things. So it was a measure of discovery. Yes, I wouldn't, being very frank with you, wouldn't say that we just get up in the morning and decide, we're going to India to do this. It is because there were things that we were trying to do that they were actually good at. And then we continued to explore that with them. And that is what got us to this place. The Indian High Commissioner was quite instrumental in doing that. And our High Commissioner to India, Dr. Roger Gopal, also was quite instrumental in getting all of that together. We were able to execute an MOU in 10 days. And having met all of those ministries and got the commitments that we needed to be able to move forward with what we have. It's not to say that if we didn't meet them, we couldn't do those things. But this just aligns a lot better and faster for us.
Well, excellent, and I have no doubt of the hardworking team, and I know you, and I know you're a thorough professional. Then what I'm asking is, why did it take so long to engage in that MOU?
Yeah, well, like I said.
And if I could, what is the cost of it to us?
Right, so there was no cost in the MOU. One, the open source software that has been offered to us, I haven't seen anything that comes with any cost yet. Well, one of the things that I was saying when I was making, and we were talking about cost and value, etc. One of the things that is difficult to ascertain when you're dealing with the way in which we're operating is how much is being done versus how much you pay for it. And I'm saying that from the context of traditionally, people look at your expenditure as a definition of your progress. If you're building a bridge, you have to spend money to build the bridge. You have to buy iron, buy this, get boards, bring a contractor to build it. One of the nice things about software, particularly open source software, is that you own it. So when India offers to us the India stack, it's their stack. They could offer it to us at no cost. And that's what they've done. Other things and don't come at that level. For example, what we're doing with X Roads doesn't come at that zero cost level. But again, the way in which we're doing this, I am a big proponent of local. So we're not buying a lot of things. We're having companies come and help us build a lot of things. It's taking a bit longer to do that. But ultimately, the idea behind it is that when we're finished with that, the model of sustainability that we want is not that we're paying you to come and keep this thing operational for us. We will operate it and manage it ourselves. We'll expand it ourselves. We'll do it ourselves. So that's where the cost is. So the answer is that was not our initial place. When we started looking, we started for the foundational things that we wanted, including the interoperability. We went to the best in the world for that, and it happened that the MOU with Estonia existed. Once we started to look at the services that you want to build on top of it, and in particular our EID service, we were looking around the world for the one that best suited what we wanted to do. And a significant part of the validation infrastructure for that existed in India. And that's when everything else came about. So it was because it wasn't that we went looking to India to get everything. We started with something that we wanted and explored it and got the rest of it.
Well, based on what you said about it being interlocking ministries, does your ministry assess the cybersecurity of other ministries? And if you have any, have you seen something that you're not happy with?
We from day one of the ministry, we've always been trying to get and be able to present a full security landscape of the state. And we've tried to do that in a number of ways, through surveys, through questionnaires, through sending people into the ministries to have a look. We do know significantly more now than we did at the beginning. And we're still trying to put that together. But it is such a disparate set of levels. So you can go from, well, what is now the Ministry of Attorney General and Legal Affairs being extremely well done, to other ministries that we've gone into that are quite vulnerable. And just because this is an open forum, I wouldn't mention the ministries, but there are a number of ministries that are quite vulnerable.
But based on that, give us a best case, worst case scenario that you have encountered.
Well, a worst case scenario would have that you have no security at all for a particular service or a particular set of equipment. Generally, most people will have a firewall, a managed firewall, or something that they operate and occupy. But that in this current threat environment, that is certainly not enough. We've looked at other ministries that are quite well prepared because what they've done is simply surrendered the majority of their infrastructure and software requirements to government. So they're fine. They live within a protected environment. An example of that, I think, if you really want an example of that, would be, and there are benefits to that. The Ministry of Works and Transport Licensing Division, for example. It's a significant amount of its function and operation sits within cloud infrastructure that is well protected within the data centers, some of the data centers that we have. What that means is that they can concentrate on building out software without having to worry about the acquisition of hardware, without having to worry about the protection, etc. All we ask that they do is that once they're launching a new application or product, that they ask the CSIRT we will have later to give them a certificate of clearance, a security certificate of clearance, that the application itself is well protected. But in terms of its infrastructure and so on, that is well fine.
So would you posit that Ministry of Works licensing division as your best case scenario?
No, it's not the best case. It's one of a good, it represents something where the risk has been transferred to another entity. So in other words, it doesn't have to protect itself. It's being protected by something else. For those that are protecting themselves, I would probably look at what exists now at the Ministry of Attorney General and Legal Affairs, maybe as the best that we have, with probably some that exist in the Ministry of Finance.
And any worst case scenario, and how did you treat with it that came across your desk?
We have worst case scenarios, like I said, because this is a public forum, I wouldn't mention the ministries, but we've encountered really bad things, and what we've been working on since then is to bring to bear some of the relevant functions, security functions within those ministries. Some of them we make recommendations for them to apply themselves, some of which we're trying to do at a global level across all of government. Yeah.
Minister, your ministry's submission stated that, however, we understand the financial limitations of some MDAs, and we have worked free of charge to support their digital transformation agenda. To what extent would the financial limitations confronting ministries, departments, and agencies hinder the government's digital transformation agenda?
Yeah, so it is important to note that while the ministry we're doing a lot of these flagship projects which are fundamental to the operations of a digital government, there are ministries, divisions, and agencies still have responsibilities within that space. The Ministry of Digital Transformation is not executing the Ministry of Agriculture's digital plan. It has to do that, and that comes with specific things. If you're doing it on hardware, you need to have it there. If you're running localized pieces within the ministry itself, that has to be there. If you're running a distribution network, the Ministry of Agriculture is probably a good example. I don't know how many satellite offices you have. It's a large number. They all have to be connected. They all have to be protected. So hardware updates, the provision of internet services, all of these things come at costs. And if the ministries within their allocations don't prioritize those things, because you remember allocations are simply allocations, they can be adjusted. And so to make sure that that has happened at the time of budget creation, I would have lobbied, along with a number of my other cabinet colleagues, to get the requisite allocations for those ministries, divisions, and agencies to get the things that they need to be able to properly and adequately address their digital transformation requirements. Some of those things are also being absorbed by other ministries. The Ministry of Public Administration is off digitizing a number of records, for example, because it's difficult for the ministries to do it to the level of quality and control that you need to have done. So they will do that for them. We would look at all of the security postures. We're bringing global security type installations in across governments, but in a prioritized manner in terms of which ministries get them first and second. So, and then of course it is left up to people like the Permanent Secretary, for example, to ensure that the allocations for, if you take the idea of security, remains within the security space. You asked one of the things that we found this not necessarily in recent times in the ministries, but in earlier times, where security apparatus is there. It is from reputable companies, and so it is, but when you look at it, the subscriptions for it not up to date. Meaning that the subscription that you pay to the agency that is, or the company that is providing you the service is not there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Minister, because
yeah.
if I could remember, Naked, because you mentioned the allocations that you lobbied for, and many ministries have gotten on this very critical issue.
Yeah.
And we have long heard of implementation deficits. Not all ministries are created equal,
right.
But the cost of non-implementation or poor implementation can be quite hazardous in various sectors. Is there a particular ministry, or is your ministry the ministry providing oversight in terms of progress of implementation of these in various ministries, though they're doing it through their own budgets and staff and expertise?
In many cases, yes. That is what we sought to do in a number of cases. And it doesn't just extend to supervising things that are ongoing and making sure they go well. It also includes stopping things that should not be going on. So it is the idea behind it is, yes, the ministries have a responsibility to do what the divisions and agencies have a responsibility to do what they have to do. But it has to be done in alignment with the general purpose and direction in which the government wants to go from a digital transformation perspective. So if you're going to, a simple example would be, if there is some particular function or application that you're building, your initial phase should not be to go and look for a piece of hardware to buy to put it in. If it is something that is applicable to be placed in the cloud that exists now or put on government, then that is where you should put it. So if your intention is to go out and buy a piece of hardware to put this thing and put it in the basement downstairs and then turn on the service and then pay the maintenance cost for the acquisition cost for the hardware, the maintenance cost for the hardware, the maintenance cost for the software, you're probably bringing a proprietary piece of software. If that is what you intend to do, when under evaluation at the concept stage of the project, it is something that should be placed in a cloud or placed within a different environment, does not reduce the cost of this, then we are going to do everything we can to stop that project, and we can.
My last question before the chair will move on, I guess. Your ministry submitted a list of value-added services to your MDAs, and the cost was $9,416,155.53.
Very, very accurate.
Have it?
As about to say, it sounds about right.
Right, blessed retention.
Yeah.
So can you give us an idea of the top 5 government ministries and the period of that cost that incurred that amount?
So just to put that into context, if I could, Chair. One of the main reasons why people embark on digital government, apart from its obvious efficiencies and things of that nature, is that it is actually one of the most inexpensive ways to deliver services. It is. And so when we start looking at and I want to put the answer to the question in context. When we answered that question in terms of support for ministries, divisions, and agencies, we didn't restrict it to cybersecurity. We even though that was the general theme, we thought about how we can support all the ministries and divisions that we have. Dev, you want to mention a few of those for the public, social dev, etc.?
Yeah, so one of the first things that we did is to sort of prioritize the ministries and agencies that can make best use of the common infrastructure to dramatically improve the quality of their services. So for example, Ministry of Social Development, which is a critical ministry in terms of supporting 200,000 plus persons with social benefits. They can become a lot better if they do have access to data from other ministries and agencies. So for example, old age pension, if they were able to get access to data, people who have immigrated and therefore should not be entitled to social benefits, or if they get access to EID, they can now do improve services, so you can validate yourself from home and do proof of life from home. So those kinds of agencies, which we know will be significantly impacted by the foundational projects we put in, we invested a lot of time and energy in helping them align that project with our core systems, as well as in trying to help them design the program so it gets big improvements in service quality. So Ministry of Social Development would have been one of them. Ministry of Health, for example. So there's a tender that went out recently for the end-to-end digitalization of the Eastern Regional Health Authority. That's one of the programs that we helped them shape. So there were a number of agencies like that we were able to help. We're doing some work with a piece of software we have called Service Online that will help digitalize front office workflow. And we have gone into a couple agencies, including the Ministry of Works and Transport, Licensing Division, and a couple other agencies to help them digitalize. By improving their systems, which is very important in its own right, we allow the entire ecosystem to be moved up to a level. So Minister talked about service improvements. We want to get to the point where we can personalize service. So if, for example, you're entitled to a grant, you don't need to know which ministry is giving you that, whether it's Ministry of Sport, Ministry of Public Utilities, Ministry of Social Development. Because you're uniquely identified properly, the system can push the grants out to you. So all of those ministries that form part of that ecosystem, we will do our best in the first instance to help. Of course, if they do come to you, of course, with Minister's approval, we do help.
Can you just point out the period that this amount covered?
That was 1 year, right?
Yeah.
Well, just the last fiscal. That was only the last fiscal. And I mean, there's some simpler ones too. I mean, your ability to pay in government offices. The TTIFC is doing significant work there. The iGov group is doing a lot of work there. But the whole thing behind it is that there's a GovPay that you can pay now with different means. We want to continue to increase that level. Remember, I know you are a champion of the downtrodden. Not everyone has a bank account. Not everyone has a credit card. And certainly not everyone has a bank card even. Your ability to pay and participate in the digital world is diminished if you don't have a way in terms of payments. We're working on a number of things like that. The digital voucher system is there. You're seeing more and more entities coming up where your ability to use simple devices like phones, I think, to be able to participate in that is happening. All of those things are happening across all the ministries, divisions, and agencies to ensure that we get maximum participation in what we're doing.
Just a question from a member of the audience, and I will add a part to it in the general context of the conversation. The question is the ministry involved in the implementation of the new digital ID, airport kiosk, and license plate systems? If so, what is the status of these projects? And two, it may seem like a strange question, but in the context of moving the country along this continuum to digital resilience, how comforted should the public feel in terms of their data being protected? When the public gets reports in the newspapers that the Prime Minister's, some of his credentials were found on the dark web, they don't necessarily disaggregate, well, that's TSTT, or it is government or state. There's a mismatch of people's perceptions on these issues. And moving more and more to the digital realm, digital ID cards, digital health cards, etc., people's data are going to be more and more digitalized and potentially open to hackers and threats. Should the public be comforted as we move to this new phase of our incarnation in the country?
In the security world, complacency is a very dangerous thing. Extremely dangerous thing. You can never be comfortable to the point where we are right now. You'll never get there. I went through my records and some lectures I did, strangely enough, at disaster management conferences, not at security or other conferences, but at disaster management conferences. And looking at that, we could identify major industries. I went as far back as 2011 that have had breaches. Forbes magazine was one that had breaches. Target, you would know about, etc. And you could come all the way forward from that. And in some of those cases, there was exfiltration. Sony with PlayStation had similar things. And in some of those cases, there was exfiltration and publishing of data. What we can tell you is this, and this is, I think this is really a statement for the general public through you, Chair, that once you put things into cyberspace, you can consider it lost. And when I say lost, I mean that it is not yours to control anymore. You are now in the hands of other people. So when you sign up for Facebook and you give them permission and you put your data into their hands, you are now in their hands for protection. When you move to new technologies, the risks change. I use this example all the time. Before we had these things and these things, everything was, well, unfortunately my PS has paper in front of him, but he has it. Everything was in paper form. And we would store data for 10 years, 15 years, we'll put them into warehouses. What are the dangers of that? Fluorescent light, removes, you can't read them after a while. Flood is paper, so you know what will happen to that, it will turn to mud. Fire. And in all of those cases, you can't replace that. If this is the only copy of it, you can't replace it. The beauty about this is also the danger about it. It is persistent data and it exists and it is almost impossible to destroy. So there's value in that. There is risk in that as well. What we as a government trying our best to do is to put the best mechanisms in place to ensure, one, that once we have it, it is safe. But two, if for some reason something happens to it, for malicious reasons, people who go into, when the guys attacked Forbes magazine, they left a note. They said we were feeling kind of generous in the way in which we did this. Rather than just publishing some of your data, what we could have done was erase it forever. If you're a magazine and you no longer have access to your content, and they erase it, what happens to your business? So not everyone is in this for different. So when we take control of your data, when you give us your data as a government, our job is to secure it, to make sure.
I'm glad you mentioned, just before we go to Member Nak.
We have to secure it.
Member Mohit.
And we will do that.
Does the government have an official policy on if the public's data is accessed illegally and maliciously, whether or not to pay ransom for it?
There's no policy on that. I certainly have not seen any. Denise, do you know of any policy? We have no policy on that. I will say this though, I've heard calls for the state to implement a policy that says the state will not pay any ransoms associated with exfiltration of data and ransomware attacks. There are a number of countries that have them. It hasn't deterred anybody from doing anything with them. And the reason for that is that you believe then that the sole purpose for the attack is monetary, and that the money that is going to be transferred comes from the victim. Ransomware for hire is a very large industry in the world. I pay you, you hack them. If you get anything from them, that's yours, that's fine. My purpose is to disrupt them. Ransomware for espionage, same thing. We want their secrets of how they've designed this thing. It's contained in the database. Go get it for us, we'll pay you. That's not doing any ransom. We look at what's happening in the areas of war.
Should the government have a policy?
I would have to say I would have to take that under advisement. The reason being, I would have to be able to say that it would have some deterrent effect on the threat actors. From what I have seen in the general space, it doesn't. There's a statement that they say law is for the lawful. So if we put a statement that says this does not happen, I'm not sure that the threat actors, what you may have is just a different type of threat actor attacking you. We have to secure as best as we can. We have to be as responsive as we can. We have to be as resilient as we can as we continue to do what we're doing.
Member Mohit. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question again, in the interest of time. On page 13, Minister and team, I note that it states in the second paragraph there, the ministry has successfully secured the necessary funding to develop and execute a strategic plan focused on the protection of our nation's critical infrastructure. What a term. Minister, can you all shed some light on what does the nation's critical infrastructure include exactly?
Remember, it's anything that could disrupt the operations of state. So I was using the example of the Ministry of Finance, and I was using the example of Customs. Customs runs the majority of its software on, majority of its services on software. If that is disrupted for any significant period of time, it will have major impacts on the country. The Ministry of Finance, they have the ability to pay salaries. If that is disrupted, they don't have to exfiltrate anything. They simply need to shut the system down, and unless you have a manual way to pay people, they won't get paid. So when we talk about the nation's critical infrastructure, it is not what the infrastructure is, it is what the service is that is being provided to the public. And what we have to look at is the resilience of that service. So it is a prioritized thing, and you're working within the space of what it is to ensure that it has, for the critical pieces, the best that we have. Remember, I'll also add that that landscape is also changing. As more and more of the country's, I like to call them utility resources, become digitalized, then that is also a different type of risk. The Minister of Public Utilities, for example, is working on, and within some of his agencies under WASA in particular, is digitizing a lot of the controls for their pumping infrastructure and gate and control infrastructure. Well, that's great. They have to build into that the security to make it work. If you don't do that, then the same thing I'm saying, the same risk experience. If you lose control of it, then what happens?
Minister, you are giving examples, which is all well and which are all well and fine.
Yes.
Ministry of Finance, WASA, Ministry of Transport, but you are speaking secured funding, necessary funding.
Yes.
And in addition to that, we are seeing here nation's critical infrastructure. Your funding,
The funding is
where
ours.
exactly it's going to go in
The
terms of
funding-
the nation's critical infrastructure?
The funding is with the Ministry of Digital Transformation.
Sure. So where is it going? You gave examples, and that's fine.
So the funding doesn't go to the agency to do it. Let me put the picture in clear things for you. To protect a lot of the things that we have to protect have to be protected by software, automated systems, and things of that nature. Every single ministry, division, and agency, if they wanted to, can go and buy them for themselves. They could. What we are seeking to do is to do that at a global level for the things that are required across the board. That is why we have secured the funding, and that is why we are doing it. It is just the better way to do it, to ensure alignment, consistency, the lowest cost, because you're talking about economies of scale, etc., etc. And we use, as far as possible, people who are very good at doing this. So it's not me and Lone and Leon and the team here that will decide this. We're using the best consultants that we have. We're using the best practices that we have. We're using resources that come in from a number of those agencies that we spoke of, the ITU, the CTU, the Andean Bank, the IDB, etc. All of that so that we find ourselves, we're using our counterparts in Israel, so that we have the best opportunity to provide the most resilient software and hardware to protect. And when I say the country's critical infrastructure, the examples I gave is exactly that I mean. The things that can be most disruptive, that are dependent on ICT technology for the providing of services for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and for Trinidad and Tobago to function generally.
We're going to go to Member Singh now. We're running short of time, and we have quite a few segments to get through. Member Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, in your submissions, what are your ministry's response to the shortcoming of the skill set requirements for some of the standardized ICT jobs in the public service? And what have you done in relation to, have you all considered speaking to the CPO in terms of getting these job descriptions reworked, especially on the emphasis now of ministries and state agencies being exposed to cyber security attacks?
So what our investigations revealed is that there are a number of security positions in ministries, divisions, and agencies that are not filled. Right? So a lot of it falls to the system administrators exclusively to deal with them. I mean, you've been in that space as well for a long time. It's good that we have a PS who is actually an IT guy. So it helps me in that. But not only that, he's been at directorship levels in ICT in other ministries. So he understands a lot of the shortcomings as well. So one is that the positions are not there. Two, and part of what I suspect some of the reasons why it's not there is that we just don't have the required amount of people with specific security qualifications to do it. So what are we doing with that? Well, we've been talking to the universities, and we've been talking to our international partners about providing scholarships for people to get into security work. It's one of the largest growing things in the world. CISOs are few and far between, so much so that...
And sorry to interrupt, but that's great. But then in the meantime, there's a skill set deficit.
Right.
And if someone goes into university now to trade in this area, they're not going to be qualified for 2-3 years.
Correct.
So what happens in the interim?
So what we do in that time, and again, I am a big proponent of this, there are a number of really highly skilled and dedicated cybersecurity companies in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is a thing that didn't exist maybe 10 years ago, but it does now. A lot of the work that we did at the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, while we were using resources that came out initially from the IDB, they relied almost, coming to the end of it, almost entirely on local content. So there are companies here, and that is also part of what is happening. They're sucking up what the private companies are sucking up, whatever skill set exists. So one of the ways that we're dealing with that is actually to employ those companies. There are very few companies in the world that handle their own security. One, it's just too complex. Two, it's something that you'll never get ahead of unless you have something that is very dedicated in terms of doing that. We were lucky to get somebody like Leon on board with us. And we've lost a couple people who we were bringing on board that went to other way more lucrative jobs because of how they've been qualified. So we have to, the stopgap is to use local companies who have the resources to do it, to do the initial protection. But the idea is we must find a way to increase the amount of security personnel that we have existing, and the only way to do that is through the education system.
Manakit.
Should we target then the secondary schools in terms, and has your ministry engaged the secondary schools at any point in time and the Ministry of Education?
Yeah, sure. PS, you want to take some of that?
All right, so sure, at the secondary school level, and of course with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, what we're looking at and what we have been doing is trying to engage from a cybersecurity awareness standpoint, the secondary school students, so that we could build that capacity at that level onwards, so that they have an idea of a safe cyberspace, what are some of the hygienic practices that they can utilize online, as well as looking at cybersecurity and security as a career pathway forward. All right, so that has been ongoing, and it will continue, you know, in a more expanded format, because we have to deal with this from a capacity building standpoint as we move into the future of expansive government e-services.
Well, has Ministry of Education given you any idea when it formed part of the curriculum?
So if I may, as he does, when we spoke to, and I mean, these interventions happen at different levels. So there's a STEM program that's going on. We always have people going to them, the girls in ICT, etc. There's a number of things that are happening. It was interesting that when you ask the participants of those things, what jobs in ICT you want, you hear programming, you hear this, security is never mentioned. And that is, again, a deficit of understanding of how the industry is changing and what it is. Programmers are hard to get, but you can find a lot of them. Security experts are not. So it is not just about getting to them and telling them this. It's them having people who are high-level security people, like Mr. Wessels, go with them, having them see younger people. One of the good things about the ministry is that I represent the old guard. PS I won't tell you his age, but he's a lot younger than I am. The ministry is filled with young people. And so when we send these young people out as ambassadors, the students see people not much older than they are who are involved in high-level ICT projects that are affecting the country, and it gives them a different perspective. The security part of that is what we're adding to it now. So it's not just the Ministry of Education, it's us as the ministry, it's the iGov, it's TAT, it's everyone trying to portray and say these are the things that we need to get done.
Member Naked.
Protection policy measures will require privacy impact assessments and a user-based orientation for explicit consent and user control over personal data. That was page 6. What is the status of the implementation of GOTT data protection policy measures?
So you would know that at the Parliament we've given a commitment to come back to have proclamation of all of the pieces of the Data Protection Act done. It's companion legislation being the Electronic Transactions Act and all of those. We're coming back to deal with that. But we have to make significant changes to what is, because what was there was previously kind of old. We have to make the changes, and you can see why. But while all of that is happening, Denise, I know you could speak at length on that for hours if you want. You probably give them a quick synopsis as to where we are with that.
Well, it's important to note that even with the legislation being partially proclaimed, what we do have in force are the general privacy principles, where there are provisions that guide how you're supposed to be treating with personal data. All right, implied consent, data is only to be used for the purpose for which it is collected. There are guidelines around how you store, you manage, you use, you reuse, etc., etc. So those things are in play. What we do not have in play is a regulatory authority, which is the Office of the Information Commissioner, who is supposed to guide, right? Now, the public sector under the Act will be mandated to follow along certain restrictions. The Information Commissioner, once installed in office, would be able to ensure compliance with the general privacy principles and the other provisions of the Data Protection Act. The Act is it's adopting a co-regulatory approach. So for the private sector, that information commissioner will also work with the private sector in different sectors to require them to develop their own codes of conduct, because certain sectors will need stricter provisions than others. For example, the financial services sector. The healthcare sector is a specific one because there are public and private approaches to healthcare, and healthcare deals with sensitive personal data, which is a whole other level of assurance that is required. So we do have provisions that are in place, that are in force, that people are required to comply with, but strengthening that will require the full proclamation of the Act, which starts with the implementation or the operationalization of the Information Commissioner's Office.
What is the status of that in terms of the operationalization of the Office of the Information Commissioner? At this time, the information we have is it's under consideration of Cabinet. What is the status of that, and is there any challenge in recruiting the positions of Commissioner and Deputy Commissioners of the Information Commissioner position?
I don't know that there are challenges, but it is still under the consideration of Cabinet. You will understand this, like all of the other ones like this that we've had to do, the PR, et cetera, requires a number of things to be put in place. The recruitment is only one aspect of it. Housing them, staff, pay, how you're going to do, where the allocation sits, where they're going to be, et cetera. So there are a number of things that have to be right and at least accounted for. All of those things are under the consideration of Cabinet. And once the necessary is completed there, obviously things will flow from that point of it. But it is still under the consideration of
And is there a timeline in the revision to Parliament of the data protection?
I don't have a timeline, but I know it is being discussed. As a member of Cabinet, I obviously will know when it is being discussed. But it is under active consideration, is the most I can tell.
Member Mohit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in terms of the regulatory framework, I just have a question there. Your submission made reference to the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Agency, which was one of the main proposals submitted by the Inter-Ministerial Committee for Cybersecurity in December 2012. Yeah? The purpose of this agency was to create a national point of contact for all cybersecurity-related concerns. Minister and team, what are your views on the relevance of pursuing the establishment of this agency, given that 10 years have elapsed since it was proposed? And an additional question, since we are running out of time, can the current cybercrime strategy assist ministries in developing their cybersecurity plans, or does it require amendments?
Do you want to take the first one, or you want me to deal with it? Go ahead. All right. Okay, so anything that we have coming up from 2012 to now, particularly in this particular space, needs to be relooked. There's no way you could simply take what you have and implement it. It is interesting that of those things that were supposed to form part of that agency, the piece that was extracted and exists today is the CSIRT, which you're going to talk to subsequently. And that represents one of the functions that they have actually is to be the repository of all cybersecurity incidents that we have sitting inside of it. Just like we have other agencies specific to other types of security things and other things, I think with cybersecurity and its ongoing importance across the national landscape, some level of agency probably needs to be created. But it requires a fresh look at it, just similar to the way we had to relook the Data Protection Act. We have to relook those things. But in terms of the relevance of a coordinating agency, a one-stop shop where you need to go to get things, etc., the benefits of those things will not go away. And certainly not necessarily what was put forward in 2014, 2015, 2012, but certainly a modern version of that is there. We do have models from a number of agencies. Denise and I attended a conference in Miami. And in that, we got to see the UK models, the US models, and I think another model out of maybe Australia or somewhere. And we looked at them, and they're all very, very different. Again, whatever you have has to be culturalized to the place and the area in which you're operating. And so a fresh look at that is something that certainly would bear some benefit.
Singh?
Chair, I'm fine, thank you.
Well, I have, based on your submission, you mentioned amendments to the Telecommunications Act. What is the current status of the amendment?
There are a number of amendments to the Telecommunications Act is an act that has been there since the deregulation of the industry. And you would understand, of course, that the industry, just like I was just mentioning to Member Mohit, from 2011 to now, things have changed drastically from when the original Telecommunications Act has happened, and there have been a number of amendments. What we have to ensure that we do here is to keep the Act relevant to what we're doing. So, for example, when the Act was created, 5G didn't exist, as an example. Therefore, the infrastructure sharing component of the Act doesn't cover 5G. You understand? So as technology changes and develops, there's no mention of AI, ethical use of AI, how can you do it? OTT services didn't exist in a significant way in those times.
But Minister, sorry, but did you have consultations with TAT to begin with?
We have to.
You've had?
Remember, the Ministry of Digital Transformation has two sub-agencies under it, the iGov and the Telecommunications Authority. So between the board, the CEO, and Permanent Secretary, myself, etc., we have constant communication with the Telecommunications Authority. We know a number of amendments that are already there that are before us for evaluation and then to be brought to bring to bear. But there has to be continuous evaluation on this. Cybersecurity was not even a significant component of it when it was created in the first place. So all of these things have to happen on a fairly regular basis. What happens, though, is that the cadence of which the changes happen is just too long. It takes 2 years before you get from this stage to the next amendment to that, and by that time, technology has evolved to a different point. Our job is to increase that cadence to the point, well, decrease the cadence, if you want to put it that way, make the time frame between them shorter.
So why our delay in ratifying the Budapest Convention?
Well, that's a different one. I don't know, Denise, if you want to take that one as well. Budapest, yeah.
Well, with the Budapest Convention, we have to have certain legislative provisions in place to be able to ratify it fully. Now, Trinidad and Tobago has made representation that we are going to accede to the act, to the convention, sorry. That would have been done in October 2021, and we have 5 years from that to be able to get it fully in place. So the plan is to get it fully in place, but it has to be that when we do accede to it, we have our house in order to be able to not just access the information and the sharing of foreign jurisdictions, but if they need to access what we have here, we need to have those things in place as
But
well.
some may suggest, if I could, that a lot of this hangs in the hands of the government. Though some of the legislation would be special majority legislation, there seems to be, from our discussion this afternoon and from our general knowledge, to start with the full proclamation of the Data Protection Act. Secondly, the evolution of the Telecommunications Act, the passage of cybercrime law in Trinidad and Tobago, which are all limbs of the tree of protection in a holistic sense. So a lot of this is, Minister, with the greatest of respect, in the hands of the government. And timelines, and as you said, and correctly so a short while ago, while we are awaiting full proclamation and awaiting debate and passage, the evolution is happening in other jurisdictions, and the paradigm in this area is evolving, in some cases, past the legislation we're seeking to pass. So where does that leave us as a country? And what do you tell the country looking on about our readiness and our resilience and our responsiveness to an evolving world in telecom and tech?
The legislative agenda of the ministry is quite extensive. We've put a subset of it in the submission for you. And I mean, but what we do have is a matrix of pretty much all the legislation that is required or normally accompanies a digital government versus what we have and where it is. Some things we just have to get rid of because it's just the Computer Misuse Act is one I use all the time. If you read it yourself, it's of no use to anyone. We need to get rid of that and do something else. So where we are in terms of having things ready and put before the CPC, et cetera, for what has to happen to inform on a number of these things is well advanced. The idea is that it only becomes what it becomes when it goes through what has to happen within the parliament, which we well know. But the components of the legislative agenda, from my mind, for the things that we need to do in the very immediate are all there. They just haven't made it to Parliament yet. They will soon. The reason why I'm saying that is it is very difficult to continue to ask a public to be trusting if we're not being seen as putting the relevant things in place to do it. And that's why so many of the small amendments that we did for data protection came, et cetera, and the fact that we've given a commitment to the Parliament that we will have it done by a particular time. It is my intention to beat that time by a significant amount. All of the pieces of legislation that we have, they kind of have to work together if we're going to be able to make this work. Every time there is something that happens in the public domain relative, whether it be a security breach or something that's happening in the private sector, you have to remember the private sector is a key driver of services to the country. And if we protect the state, using your analogy, the weakest link, if we protect the state very well and the private sector is not protected, then we're in the same problem. There are a number of things in there that could disrupt that.
With us. What is the lesson to the state and the public in light of what happened at TSTT?
Well, the lessons learned will be quite simple. One, you could recognize that an organization that has that level of extent of influence in the society in terms of its services that it provides, when it is disrupted, it becomes a significant nuisance to the people and its customers, but generally the customers are the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That's the first thing you have to know. Two, I think, and even, well, not more importantly, but as importantly than that, is that even though they've suffered this major disruption, they've been able to return service to their customers. I think a big part of what people focus on when threats are realized is the fact that the threat has happened. A significant part that I think people should pay attention to is the fact that while the disruption did occur, your service was actually restored. And I think the faster that happened, the better it is. Two, I think it's been admitted, I don't think I'm saying anything out of school, that the communications in this manner wasn't handled to the best that it could. And I think that is also a significant component of what we have. When you have breaches of that type, the type of communications that you're dealing with is almost similar to a disaster type thing. It's emergency type and crisis type communications that you have, and there are rules that surround that. And I think in our submission you would have seen where we have people have to be prepared for that. I think people will accept that things can happen, but you must communicate with them in an effective way for them to understand what has happened and for them to understand what to expect. I think so the ability to identify that something has happened, the ability to restore the service, which demonstrates a level of resilience, the ability to communicate effectively with your public is something that must happen with all your customers and stakeholders, not just the public. And then, of course, your ability to be able to identify what has happened and put things in place to make it significantly more difficult for that to happen again. That review, that process, all of that has to happen. And if there's anything that anyone should learn from that is if you are operating a business in Trinidad and Tobago that involves significant ICT content or the utilization of significant ICT, you must have those things in place if you want to be able to continue to operate effectively in whatever business you're doing.
And as I close, may I add the effective communication should be timely, relevant, and accurate.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Minister Bacchus, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time here, and so to the time of your team, Permanent Secretary, Mr. Corey Belfort, Digital Transformation Advisor, Mr. Devendra Ramnarine, Deputy National Chief Digital Officer, Denise White, and Deputy National Chief Digital Officer, Leon Wessels. Thank you all for being with us. We appreciate your time and your contributions. We will take a short break. We'll suspend for about 5 minutes and come back with the other two entities that are due to come before us today. Thank you so much once again.
Oh, thanks to you.
We are suspended. Welcome back. Of course, thank you for joining us. The inquiry into the cyber issues in Trinidad and Tobago. We are happy to have the two entities before us once again. The committee's chairman, Paul Richards. I'll ask the committee, for the purposes of our new stakeholders, to please introduce themselves, starting with Member Mohit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pleasant good afternoon to those of you joining us, and we do look forward to hearing from you.
Member Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Avinash Singh, member, and I do look forward to a very productive session this afternoon.
Member Naked.
Welcome, and we look forward to questioning you guys. Okay, David Naked.
And we're here focusing on an examination of the government's ongoing response to the recent cyber attacks on state bodies and entities. Before us in this section, or this segment, we have the Trinidad and Tobago Cyber and Social Media Unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and also the Cybersecurity Incident Response Team, Ministry of National Security. Thank you all for joining us. At this time, I'd like to invite the teams to introduce themselves and the persons with them, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Amos Sylvester, Acting Superintendent, Information Technology.
Marvin Walker, Sergeant of Police, Head of the Cyber and Social Media Unit.
Thank you. And from the Ministry of National Security.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Angus Smith, Manager of the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Incident Response Team.
Good afternoon, everyone. Anish Bichu, ICT Security Specialist with the Cybersecurity Incident Response Team.
Thank you all for joining us once again. Just like to advise that both committee members and officials to direct their questions and concerns through the chair. We'll also remind members and officials to kindly activate the microphone on their devices when they're acknowledged by the chair, and turn it off when they've concluded their contribution, be it questions and or comments. Can we, at this time, introduce or have Mr. Sylvester make a short interjection to start our proceedings, and then that'll be followed by Mr. Smith from the Ministry of National Security.
Chair, the Cybersecurity and Social Media Unit of the Trinidad and Tobago is the unit that is responsible for providing technological assistance to all the arms of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in matters dealing with cybersecurity, cyber-enabled crimes, and any digital incidents that may occur that breaches the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. The unit has been structured and functioning since 2008 and continues to do so and train and retrain its members to face the evolving threat of cybercrime.
Thank you. And Mr. Smith?
It's good afternoon again, everyone. All right, the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Incident Response Team is responsible for incident response and management in the first instance. We are a national CSID, wherein that we are responsible to respond to incidents on a national scale, critical infrastructure, government services, and even where we can, private sector entities. We really provide that service from a number of areas. It's a wide variety of services that we do provide in the context of, again, incident response, everything around cybersecurity, and it's a lot, which we might get into a little bit more to explain that to you. Thanks again.
Thank you all so much, or both so much. Let me start with the question I posed to the Minister Bacchus earlier on, who said it would be better posed to you, Mr. Smith, and the Cybersecurity Incident Response Team, Ministry of National Security, excuse me, particularly in the context of the information we have in the public domain about cyber attacks on the Ministry of Health facility in South, the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs, TSTT, and several private sector institutions. Can you give us a sense, and presuming that you would have been called to intervene or collaborate on those issues, give us a sense of how pervasive are these attacks in Trinidad and Tobago on a daily or weekly basis or a monthly basis? If you could give us that kind of data set so we know what we're dealing with in terms of how Trinidad and Tobago is being targeted by these incidents.
So I'll answer it in this way. Now, I could give the monthly or the daily statistics, might be a little bit more so complex in the context of things, but from let's say from a year-on-year basis. So over the last 5 years, and we could go from, let's say, 2019 to now, we have had something like 200 plus different types of incidents throughout Trinidad and Tobago, both private and public sector. So that would range from a different, in terms of categories. We have data breach and system compromise, we have ransomware, we have phishing, we have business email compromise, we have also website defacement and denial of service, and then malicious insiders. So it's kind of broken up into those categories, these 200 plus incidents over the last 5 years. We could give you one, and from the government sector, you would see about 80 incidents, and then from the private sector, we have about 100, 105 so. So those are over the last 5 years.
Are there particular ministries that are being targeted more than others?
Not necessarily, no. We haven't seen any indication that anybody is being targeted more than others.
You were going to add something just now.
Oh, no, I could kind of break it up into year on year, but generally, no.
Please go ahead.
Oh, so we could kind of look at, like, let's say 2023, we have had 22 public sector incidents, and then we have 29 private sector incidents. Now, these are incidents that are reported to us, and I want to make that clear. The statistics we would have is what have been reported to us as incidents. So we generally would get, for the most part, from what we have seen over the years, a pretty good collection of the incidents that do happen within this space because of a number of ways we collect the information. So we tend to have a pretty decent, let's say, I would want to venture and say somewhere 99, 80, 85% at least of the incidents that really do happen, we actually have it reported to us in some form or fashion.
Is there a requirement for private sector or public sector to report incidents to you?
No, there isn't any requirement for them to report.
And in terms of the incidents you identified, 200 in the last, is it 5 years?
Yes, over the last 5 years.
How many of those would be repeat from the same actors, and have you been able to ascertain the main actors in play here and where they are originating from globally?
So the actors generally would be, especially ransomware especially, would be from foreign groups that we would encounter. So we have encountered a number of instances of foreign groups. We have maybe 2 cases that were repeat offenders in a sense, so that the same entity got attacked twice. That only has happened twice over the last 5 years. Generally, when an entity gets attacked, generally it seems to be so far it's a one-off incident with them. But the actors can come from everywhere across the world, anywhere across the world, as a matter of fact, because there are no ransomware groups, ransomware, certain groups that we know within the space, they have perpetrated these attacks.
And before I go to Member Mohit, how would you assess, if you have been able to do so, the resilience and readiness of state entities or ministries in response to these attacks?
It's varying stages. Some, as the minister may have indicated earlier, some ministries are better than some because they have either more mature in the context of their staff, their procedures, the policies that they would have, and generally that is why, or that is where the degree of maturity would kind of impact upon the organization. So if you look at the spread of government ministries and agencies, there are varying levels of cybersecurity maturity in the context.
Okay, thank you, Member Mohit. We're starting with the Ministry of National Security.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the Cybercrime and Social Media Unit, you raised the statistics in terms of 200 cases in the last 5 years. I would like to know, in relation to some of these categories of complaints, because I know persons who almost on a daily basis get phishing emails. For example, you have won a lotto and you are required to go and send X amount of money to claim this lotto or claim this win. Are those persons who find themselves in those categories, they come to make a claim or come to report? Because in my estimation, Mr. Chairman, I think there's a level of under-reporting of cybercrime incidents in this country. So I wanted to get the thoughts from both agencies represented here on that in terms of the under-reported nature of cybercrime. And if that is so, what strategies or systems can be introduced to encourage greater reporting of cybercrimes? But I also want to comment in relation to that category of persons, because I myself sometimes get these emails saying that you've won this or won that and you're required to send money abroad and whatnot. And believe it or not, some people actually send money. and engage these fishing expeditions. So could you all share your thoughts on that point?
Member, if I may, I would agree with you that there is a great degree of underreporting in terms of cyber crimes to the police service. The persons, for whatever reasons, do not come to the police service to report cyber crimes. So whereas my colleague in the CSIRT would have indicated in excess of 200 over the last 5 years, the police service cannot say the same in terms of reports being made. There are various levels of cybercrimes through the social media, phishing, as you so rightfully said. However, generally, those are not reported to us. Persons just either, some may subscribe to it, the majority don't, so that they will get a 1 out of 20 subscribing. In terms of persons coming to make the report, we depend largely on legislation. And what we have so far is a lack of legislation that deals
I'm glad you mentioned that. What constitutes a cyber crime in Trinidad and Tobago in the absence of that legislation? So to clarify for the public, because you said you're not having a lot of reports of cyber crimes, but people may not know what is legal and what is legal, what's a crime and what's not.
Right. So the only thing we have in this country is the Computer Misuse Act of 2000, which is 23 years ago. And that act never really had the sight of the kind of crimes or situations we have now. So social media then and social media now is two different things in terms of the landscape of the technology. So that all that act really deals with or treat with is unauthorized access and simple basic giving out, probably somebody accessing your system and modifying data. But it doesn't go into the phishing and all these web defacements and to a certain degree. So there, even if persons make the report, there is nothing really for us to pursue because of the fact that in relying on the legislation, we need to go to the foreign jurisdiction to get the information. Without having the legislation on our side, you cannot actually go using the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty because it requires you to have your legislation in place. So, and once you have your legislation in place, then they could deal with the corresponding offense in the following country and give you that information. So all the way wrong, we don't have the requisite tools and information to
So in a real sense, would it be correct to say, on the books, there are no cyber crimes being committed because there are no laws that criminalize these behaviors online?
There are incidents, but the crime, to use the word crime, that would be almost wrong, since crimes speak to legislation and laws being enacted.
Thank you. Member Mohit?
Mr. Chair, sorry about that. My first question in terms of the TT-CERT, what is the mandate of the TT-CERT, if you can provide some clarity?
So the TT-CERT's mandate is based on the 2012 National Cybersecurity Strategy. The strategy fundamentally was to develop a coordinated approach to treat with cybersecurity. Under that strategy, the TT-CERT, in terms of the incident response pillar, was one of the entities which were stood up under the strategy. The mandate of the unit is really to treat with national cybersecurity incidents, deal with protect critical infrastructure, in essence, and treat with cybersecurity incidents. Fundamentally, that's the mandate that we do have, is to really manage and treat with cybersecurity incidents that affect the country, that affect critical infrastructure, in essence.
And can you indicate, based on what you're saying, whether the ministries have engaged you for your services at any point in time or any given time?
Yes, we have. We offer a number of services to ministries and agencies, and is a wide range of services actually that we do offer, and that we have engaged ministries in, and we have a number of ministries. So
you mind telling us some of your priorities or top services that you provide to ministries?
Sure, no problem. Incident response and management, we do root cause analysis in terms of incidents. We do assessment of software applications. We do standards-based assessments of all online payment systems for the government. We provide cybersecurity control gap assessments. We do server configuration review and hardening. We do secure network architecture design. We also do vulnerability assessments and analysis. We do notifications and alerts. We send out that regularly, and security solution deployments. May not be all this, that's just some of the services that we do provide.
And you were saying about the ministries engaging you?
Yes, so I could give you a list. So from some of the completed assessments we have done is Ministry of Legal Affairs, the Registrar General's Office, Civil Lands and Companies, IPO, the Ministry of Works and Transport, Ministry of Trade and Industry, the SCW platform. We have the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. We actually have our ongoing assessments right now with their social platform, with their social services platform. We have Ministry of National Security. We have done travel pass for them. We actually right now doing e-visas in the context of looking at that. Ministry of Health, digital vaccine platform. That being said, right now we have a number of gap assessments that either ongoing or they have engaged us to actually conduct these gap assessments. So cybersecurity control gap assessments, which will be standards based. Customs Excise Division, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, the Immigration Division, Ministry of Health, all the 5 RHAs, we have assessments to do with them. Point Fortin Borough Corporations, Arima Borough Corporation, the Office of the Prime Minister, Trinidad and Tobago Securities Exchange Commission, Lake Asphalt, Ministry of Education, National Helicopter Services, Environmental Management Agency, Inland Revenue.
Before you move on, is TSTT on that list of people you've engaged?
No.
So TSTT has not engaged you?
No. Over time, no. They have never engaged us.
Engaged us.
You mentioned the 5 RHAs.
Yes.
Recently, we would have been informed in this very same JSC of a cyber attack at Southwest Regional Health Authority. You mentioned assessments. Have you done any assessments on this particular attack, and do you have any findings or anything that you can share with us arising out of any assessments conducted at this particular RHE?
All right. So yes, we have done in terms of we managed the incident at Southwest, 1. And 2, coming out of the Southwest incident, we engaged the Ministry of Health to conduct an assessment, which is a control-based assessment on the Ministry of Health and the 5 RHAs. We already started the process. We actually did the initial interviews and investigation with the ministry and the 5 RHAs. With 4 of the RHAs, we still have Tobago to arrange, but we have done that. I will allow Anish Bechu here with me to actually walk through the Southwest incident a little bit for you, just to give you a synopsis of it.
Good afternoon. So when we look at the Southwest incident, what really happened is exploitation of a remote access system, right? So it was a legitimate setup for remote access into the network. And what the threat actors would have done was compromise credentials and access the system using a legitimate measure. After that, what they did, they conducted reconnaissance across the SWRHA network and then deployed ransomware subsequently. In terms of where the threat actor was from, we can't say that for certain. The only evidence of a foreign party we have at play is a Tor exit node IP address, or 2 Tor exit node IP addresses originating out of Europe.
Thank you for that information. In terms of documented policy guidelines, can you all state for us what documented policy guides the operation of the TTCERT?
We function based on industry standard documentation. So there's what we would call outside of the cabinet note that implemented the CERT or caused the CERT to be stood up, we tend to function and based on industry standards. So there's a RFC, which is 2350, which guides our operation, which actually allows us to now, 1, tailor our services towards the area. and provide the different type of services that the incident response team is supposed to supply. That is based on one, as I said, industry best practice, and also we are part of, or trying to be a part of, sorry, the International Organization of Incident Response Teams, which we call FIRST. And because we follow those particular frameworks tied back to CIS controls, and we also do NIST in essence, those are some of the guiding frameworks that guide our operations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the documented procedure as you just outlined, what is the documented, in fact, given the constant evolving nature of cybersecurity, and you've just referred to the policy that you all follow, would you mind sharing what is the date, or in fact, what is the date of that policy, knowing fully well that this evolving nature of cybersecurity and the whole digitalization, when was the last time this policy updated?
So actually, we just completed what we would call an industry standard-based assessment of the unit, which is called SIM3. As a matter of fact, that is one of the industry standards for CSIRT assessments. That was done by the USAID program and in conjunction with Deloitte, and they just completed actually assessment of the unit in order to look at our policies, our operations, and what we need to do to improve the unit. That was finished. Actually, we got the report just last week, actually.
And anything in that report you may want to share with this committee and the population in terms of what to expect in the coming season in terms of all the cyber, especially in the nature of the environment of all of these cyber attacks. What in that policy change or shift can assist the population, you know, with that ease of knowing that they are safe and secured and so on?
If I could just add to that, in addition to what Member Singh asked, what would have stuck out to you as the major vulnerabilities in Trinidad and Tobago based on the attacks you're seeing on state agencies and entities?
So to answer Chairman's question in the first instance, we tend to see similar problems across the line. Generally, when we go to entities to treat with an incident, configuration issues, most times we'll get system configuration issues. We'll have, well, in terms of lack of staff or not enough staff. Generally, those are the two fundamental things that actually cause most of the incidents. Because they don't have the staff, they may cut corners to manage the configuration, and because of that, there are holes in the configuration. So improper configuration.
What does that mean they don't have staff? They don't have trained staff?
They may not have enough trained staff or just enough to suit, yes, trained staff. That's the best way to put it. Enough trained staff to suit the positions that require to ensure that their infrastructure will be secure. And because of that, it has a knock-on effect that they may not configure their environment in the proper way it's supposed to be done. So fundamentally, I think 9 out of 10 cases we would find that would be the issue. We could trace it back to some flaw in the configuration.
Member Nakid.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sylvester, you just to expand a bit on what the Chair spoke with you about, as relates, you didn't call it a crime. If there was a cybersecurity breach, you said it's an incident. Correct? Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
That's because of the legislation.
Lack of legislation.
Lack of legislation. Is it a siloed approach, or is there collaboration with the MDT, the Ministry of Digital Transformation, to get and push legislation, or is there collaboration? Because I'm sure the viewing public is saying, if that breach that occurred in TSTT was done by somebody locally, could they have been held accountable?
In terms of the MDT, prior to the MDT, the TTPS and the Cybersecurity Incident Response Team have been working with the Ministry of National Security towards the creation of legislation since 2012. In fact, since 2009, we have been working together, and even the basic legislation that was in draft, we all had a hand in terms of getting that legislation where it was. The fact is that the legislation never got off the ground for various reasons, as we are aware of. But the present MDT, we have not had any present discussion with them, but we have a very perfect working arrangement with the Cybersecurity Incident Response Team.
If I could just follow Member Nakid's question and your response. The CERT TT indicated, and just following, because I think the TSTT example is a good example of what can happen nationally. It's a very highly publicized event. We all know what happened in the long run. And the CERT TT indicated that they have had no report from TSTT. Have you had a report from TSTT? And TSTT may be a pseudo-state entity, but one would imagine, even if it's a breach and an incident of that nature, the TTPS may have been actually a report made. Has a report been made to you?
A report has been made to us at the end of the day.
That's interesting. That's an interestingly guarded response.
In the beginning, the report was not made. However, as the situation unfolded more and more, a report was made to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service.
Is the TTPS part of the ongoing internal investigation? Or any investigation whatsoever into that incident?
The TTPS has launched its own investigation into the matter, but we are not a part of the internal investigation within TSTT.
Okay, thank you, Member Nakid.
Thank you, Chair. So, what amendments would you suggest, given that we have on the Computer Misuse Act which you referred to? What amendments would you suggest that could help us combat cybercrime?
The present draft legislation has been there for consideration since 2012. We are almost 11 years away from that in 2023. What we actually need to do is almost a complete overhaul of what is there to start looking at the present evolving environment and then put legislation. Because we, as a region, almost all the countries put a Computer Misuse Act forward around 2000. Most of the region went forward and developed their cyber security legislation a few years after. Trinidad, unfortunately, was one who did not. But all the other regional countries are at a point where they are almost changing and upgrading their legislation. So we have to do now almost a complete overhaul. Even our Computer Misuse Act, as it was proclaimed then, the fines and penalties in it is almost very small in comparison, because it's 23 years ago, in comparison to what the present day would suggest or recommend from the evolving landscape.
That dovetails nicely with my next question. Has CSERT formed any collaboration or partnership with any state agencies or local bodies to develop systems, protocols, and guidelines to counteract cybersecurity threats at the national level?
So we have a number of arrangements in essence and in the various stages of collaboration with entities. So TTIFC is one, Ministry of Digital Transformation is another one, where we engage them in order to, one, develop either policy, and we had put forward a suite of policies with them in collaboration with them to manage proper incidents. One, like mandatory reporting. We have also proper use, acceptable use, policies for acceptable use. So it's a suite of about 6 policies that we had that we put forward them. So they were, we work with them. Central Bank, we have entered in a MOU agreement, or actually in the process of going through that, to develop what we call our information sharing group with the financial sector. We are doing that through the Central Bank. We have MOUs with not MOUs, but we're developing one, but we do significant work with iGovTT. So all of their application development systems, we actually work with them to secure them. We will do security assessments on these applications and actually ensure that they actually meet particular standards. So we have a framework which we use to assess them. People like IRD and Customs, we're actually working with the Ministry of Finance now to look at assessing, conducting an assessment on their platforms. Again, yeah, we work with the TTDF in terms of now we are now in the process of going to develop a cyber defense portfolio, in a sense. DTTPS, well, cybercrime, and as Superintendent Sylvester rightly said, we work with the TTTPS very closely in the context of protecting and working with in terms of cybersecurity issues. Ministry of Health, again, and I mentioned the program before, that we're working with them in a comprehensive program to look and assess their systems to verify that they actually, or do a gap assessment in a sense, to ensure that they actually could reach a level of maturity for cybersecurity and look what measures they need to put in place and put controls. That's just some of the entities we may have collaborative work with in the context.
If I could just follow through that question dealing with legislation, and this is for the TT Police Service and certainly TT. In the absence of cybercrime legislation and with the partial proclamation of and the obsolescence of the Computer Misuse Act as you described it, and the only partial proclamation of the Data Misuse Act, what pieces of legislation, and this is to Sergeant Walker, is applicable or are applicable in the present circumstances, if at all, if any at all, in regards crimes committed online. So I'm specifically not using cyber crimes for obvious reasons, because in the absence of specific legislation, there are already no cyber crimes in this country.
When it comes to cybercrime, we look at two categories: cyber-enabled and cyber-direct crimes. The formation of the legislation will help more in terms of the cyber direct crimes. However, we live in a digital age, and everyone here, certainly within the room, has a cellular phone. Almost everyone, I'm certain, even has a laptop as well, or may have some sort of online account or platform as well. And is in the cyber-enabled crime, is the use of these technologies in order to perpetrate crime. So, for example, and this is information coming from the Crime and Problem Analysis branch, which spoke about the Facebook incidents, right? And there was, in 2022, there were 38 robberies emanating out, coming out from the Facebook platform, whether it be marketplace, whether it be from direct messaging. The member also mentioned phishing.
When you say robberies, what do you mean by robberies in specific? Are they luring people to be robbed, or are there robberies perpetrated on?
Right. When we speak, robbery is robbery. They're straight luring them to a location and then they're being robbed. So in 2022, there were 38 incidents, and 2023, 68. Despite our efforts, the TTPS's effort to educate the public in regards to these type of incidents that are occurring. There were 58 larceny in 2022 and 1723, 14 and 35 respectively in fraud incidents. And the current legislation, what we try to use is just from the various parts. Offenses Against the Person Act, which covers areas in things like harassment and stuff like that. So the upgrade in terms of the legislation would do a few things. It would enable us to be able to better categorize some of the offenses, because let's say, for example, cyberbullying is not an offense particularly, but generally in the cyberspace world and community, it is a known category, but we don't have the legislation that specifically supports or goes against with cyberbullying.
In terms of the internet-enabled incidents, you described the 36 and 60 plus.
Yeah.
Were there any arrests made coming out of those?
Yeah, there have been arrests. I don't have the specific statistics to go against the occurrence of the incidents as opposed to the solved crimes, but there have been arrests in regards to those. There have even been homicides that occurred out of these incidents, and I know for one, there was one particularly that was solved. Can't get the specific homicide itself, but there was a homicide that was kind of started off with that luring and so forth, and resulted in the death of someone.
Just before I go back to Member Mohit, there was the beginning of a report of the key findings of the Deloitte report from Mr. Smith. Could you continue that, please, just as we have it on the record?
Oh, the Deloitte report was about the CSIT in the context of us, the status as we are as a unit, and our maturity. So it really looked at a number of areas. It looked like organizational, technical, procedural, in a sense, and it covered an procedural. It really delves into the unit and its maturity. As I said before, we fundamentally would have some work in some fundamental areas and maybe more around documentation, for want of a better word. Like for most IT persons, you need to kind of sharpen up your documentation, but we were very strong in technical. The procedural were really strong. So that fundamentally lend us to our intermediate. Now, there are 3 categories of maturity levels: basic, intermediate, and advanced. We actually right now on the cusp of being intermediate and pushing forward towards a more advanced posture, in essence, as a unit in terms of the services we provide, how we provide it, and the way we operate.
Thank you, Member Mohit.
Mr. Chair, just one question before I go on. You mentioned the various ministries you work with, the procedures, the types of services you provide. Just one additional question under that particular category. The minister this morning, when we met with, well, this afternoon, sorry, when we met with our Ministry of Digital Transformation, would have mentioned about the ICT competencies in terms of the various agencies, state agencies. Can you tell us a little bit about the process involved for a government agency certified in a particular ICT competency? Because you gave us a series of them you work with.
Okay, yes, we do work. So now let's look at, we then look at applications for online payments. In that case, we would look at the application, the development process, the development life cycle, how the application was developed, and then certify that application, in essence. So we would work with the developers, work with the ICT persons in the context of the persons who manage the servers, implement the systems, and then look at certifying them based on the requirements for. Outside of that, the ICT competency from the various ministries would then again be looked at in the context of they have the type of staff, the required staff, where they have administrators, network administrators, and technicians. Those are the type of competencies from that perspective. Now, our role really is to look at the application and verify that and certify it. I don't know if that is what the minister was referring to in the context of that particular process in the context of certifying. So we don't actually certify the IT people per se, but in the context of the applications and the applications being developed, we have a role to play in actually certifying those applications.
The IT persons?
No, not the IT persons per se, no.
All right. With respect to TT-CERT, in terms of collaborations and partnerships, in terms of the artificial intelligence, with the emergence of artificial intelligence, what cybersecurity threats and potential impacts can the public expect to contend with?
No, at the end of the day, as any new technology and new fandangled technology, there are measures in place that you need to, there would be measures that you need to put in place. At the end of the day, misuse is really the crux of the matter. At the end of the day, artificial intelligence can be used to do a number of things, from generate text to generate images to create systems that would, or applications that may do harmful actions. At the end of the day, and going back to Superintendent Sylvester's earlier point, the legislation that we require or policies that we require to now control or put the right controls in place is what we need to have. So at the end of the day, the imagination is really wide in what artificial intelligence can do, but we as a country in essence have to look at now what controls we want to put in place to protect the citizens from misuse, using it for, again, mischievous intent. And I think that is where we have to look at and do at least analysis and come up with, okay, what can we protect, what do we have to protect the citizens from, and actually put the right policies and procedures in place. I think that's the only way we could treat with almost AI and any type of new technology that comes out.
Member Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, just going back to a question Member Naked would have raised, maybe I missed the response, but when Mr. Bichu was giving us the synopsis in terms of what happened in Southwest, he did mention that it's a high possibility that a local person would have committed this crime or incident, you want to call it, right? We established the cybercrime and incident story. My question is, if, let's just say, hypothetically, you found this person who would have conspired or would have actually done the incident, what is the repercussion of that? In other words, what would be the fine or the process? And in terms of, is it going to be a case of computer misuse? Is that is how we are going to treat with it? If this person is caught, Mr. Bechu, you would have gone through the process with us, and in terms of foreign, international, local, whatnot. If this IP address traces to somebody locally, and this person is caught, and maybe TTPS could assist as well in terms of what is the process in terms of going forward if this person is caught.
If I may, the Computer Misuse Act, we would refer to the Computer Misuse Act, unauthorized access or unauthorized modification of data. Those two offenses are captured in the legislation, and they would treat with that person once the person and everything happened locally.
And could you share the penalty for those offenses?
I am not too sure of the penalties. It should be
$20,000 in 3 years.
Yeah.
That light. Member Singh?
So, which leads me to my next question. Now that we established the penalty, it's almost encouraging to continue these activities. What mechanism the TTPS, as well as the Ministry of National Security, different arms of cyber security space, what mechanisms can you all encourage or indicate to the population, the looking and viewing audience here, in terms of what steps they can take? Because I just want to, Chairman, I just want to sway for one point. Only last week in my village, it was reported that someone went to their local bank, withdrew cash, and was a victim of crime, robbery. In my estimation, a lot of these crimes are taking place, and information from persons at the banking side of things, because it's either you or the bank, the teller you would have engaged, know your withdrawal. Could persons see more cases coming to the fore where offenses like these can be taken into consideration? Or in other words, what can you all do to prevent or guide persons accordingly to prevent these types of incidents from happening?
If I may, in any cyber situation or security situations, we tend to always focus on the technical part, but the weakest link is the human element. And one of the aspects coming from the TTPS, what we seek to do is launching of the cyber awareness programs. I think my colleague from CERT would have mentioned, or if he didn't mention, but we collaborate a lot in terms of doing these both public and internal cyber awareness programs. We have partnered with TT CERT and delivered lectures to various schools and also at ministries. Just week before, we would have delivered something to the Ministry of Works and Transport as well, of a particular incident that may have been occurring around there. And in educating persons as to limit or harden their vulnerability is what we think is the direction that should be going. Alongside with, yes, hardening the software and hardware infrastructures. But the weakest link is there because despite the top security that you may have, one person comes in and just, let me say, opens up that remote access portal, and that's it, despite all the $1 million stuff that you have. So the human element and the education of that person in terms of guided by policy and so forth would be the way in terms of the TTPS dealing with those situations.
Member Naked.
Well, in light of what we have discussed previously, how many persons have been charged under the Computer Misuse Act in the last 3 years, past 3 years?
I don't think we have any persons charged within the last 3 years. I could get data to confirm or deny, but I don't think we have any persons charged within the last 3 years.
Is it because the legislation is just inadequate and obsolete at this time, primarily?
The legislation is inadequate to treat with it. The way how the legislation was drafted, you actually almost need to get the actual evidence, seeing the person doing the breach for you to actually charge them. But the legislation needs updating, it needs re-energizing for it to work for us.
One of the issues I think the members of CERT indicated earlier on is that you work with both the public sector and sometimes the private sector. I recently had an interface with somebody from Caribbean Impact, who indicated that sometimes private sector entities are quite reluctant to engage you all. I guess both the TTPS and the CERT-TT. Would that be an accurate statement? Because one particularly large chain had an incident a year or two ago, and Caribbean Impact personnel indicated that they almost had to cajole them into sharing information for an ongoing investigation. So would you say the private sector is cooperative and engages your services, or not so much?
The agency or private enterprise coming together to lay what has happened to them in the general public is not always within, or they don't see it always within their best interest. Because if everyone knew that Bank A was susceptible to hacking on a daily basis, most of the customers would want to move away from that institution and go to another institution. And hence, they are posed with that challenge now of keeping the information away from the public. So previously and traditionally, what was done, almost all companies prior to TSTT would have, the general rule was deny everything and hope nobody finds out, and you just bring back your services online in quick time so that persons would not have even feel if anything happened. But within recent time, and the state enterprise did try to take that road, and it led them down to another road where the information did come out that it did happen, and then you have a different line you have to take. But that has always been how all the companies in this country try to deal with it, try not to involve the members of the public so that persons would still feel comfortable going to the establishment, just like any person on a daily basis. If you know that the supermarket you are going to is presently being hacked on a regular basis, you might want to shy away from that supermarket and go. So the business goes elsewhere.
But
trust and confidence in the
But as you said earlier
goes
on,
elsewhere.
there is the Computer Misuse Act, so someone's information data was authorized illegally. So one would imagine the natural response would be to engage the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service as the official law enforcement agency for a potential breach of the law.
It should be the natural response, but it is not, because everybody is focused on their business image and the image to the country as a whole.
I hope that's the front page tomorrow. Mr. Smith, any response to this?
Yes, so in light of what Superintendent Sylvester just said, we have a kind of mixed bag, because we have been doing work as a unit throughout both sectors, public and private sector. Now, we have developed a number of relationships over the time, wherein that because of that we tend to, not official reports, but we tend to get more information than previously. That being said, and yes, what he said was really true. The bigger companies or the big organizations tend to have that they deny everything. So you would get that from the bigger companies. Smaller entities, you may actually get them coming to you faster to report incidents, and that's a trend that we have seen. So because of that, we have, as a unit, we are now we are in the process of establishing what we would call information sharing groups between sectors. One of the first ones we're trying to do it with is the finance sector, and we have the buy-in of the central bank in that regard to develop sharing platforms. In essence, we actually creating a sharing platform that they could share information, especially threat-based information, so that we could actually connect all the other entities, all the stakeholders from the energy sector to transport to telecom to government and even the financial sector, so that they could share threat-based information. So that has been getting a good uptake. So in the context of, yes, the bigger companies may say no, but actually we are getting support in essence on the ground to try these initiatives to get more information.
But I want to go back to Superintendent Sylvester. This is a very interesting discussion we're having here. Because if a law has been broken, can it be that a local company can impede the police in the execution of their duties, finding information for a law broken against a citizen of this country, even if you're trying to protect your image? Because if police come to me to get information about a potential breach of the law, can I tell them no? And can a company do that also?
On a regular basis, well, you have a number of, for what to be better word, I say rumors going around. We depend on the victim to come forward and say, this is true. My company has been breached in some way for us to take action. Other than that, we are hearing that somebody's car was broken into. And you're seeing the person coming before you every day, and not for 1 minute they are mentioning the car was broken. We at a point where we actually have to wait on them to tell us something.
Interesting, because, sorry to interrupt you, because the widely in the public domain, the information about TSTT and professionals in the field were saying that information was illegally breached. In terms of the supermarket chain, information was in the public domain that the police could act on. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the police don't always have to wait for the company. They can act on victims' reports to the police that they've heard the information has been breached, and they want the police to conduct an investigation in the interest of whether a law was broken or not. Am I incorrect in that presumption?
In certain types of offenses, yes. However, there are some offenses where you actually need the victim. So that if you notice the trend with the last major breach we had here, while persons on the ground were saying the company was breached, the company was putting out utterances and saying to the contrary, no. And they continued that line until they could say no more. So, and that is the fact that presently exists, so that yes, you would have a number of persons running around saying this company was breached. And everybody, you might have quarter of the society saying the company was breached. But if management comes out and say, no, it was not breached, who should we believe at this point?
But are there legal implications to that sort of denial? That's presuming that the company was acting on information and saying otherwise, because we don't know. Maybe that's the information the company had at the time.
There is no legislation, unlike the U.S. Stating a falsehood to the certain legal entities is an offense. We do not have that in Trinidad and Tobago, so we still need to have them tell us directly.
Well, just to ask you then, since it's very clear, pellucid, that our legislation is so defective, almost defunct, when was the last consultation that you had with the government on this? When? In the last 3 years, 5 years?
We had a joint consultation between the Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Legal Affairs in 2021. Yes, 2021, to produce a version of the Computer Misuse Act amendment to put forward to be passed.
Something that, according to Mr. Sylvester, would be more relevant to our time.
Yes, 2022, yes. And that actually ties itself back to the Budapest Convention, ensures that it is aligned with that, and a version of that was sent forward to be
So that was
addressed.
2 years ago.
Yeah, give or take, yeah, 2021, it finished, yeah, I think we finished April 2021, yeah.
And what has resulted? What has come out of that?
It's at the AG's office.
Pardon?
It's at the AG's office.
We have one more question we can pose. We're running out of time, but just a question from the audience looking on. We are aware that there's a difference between the civil and the criminal arenas where these sorts of incidents are potentially occurring in the country. And the question is, has the TTPS observed differences in the mens rea and actus rea elements of certain crimes that now can be committed in the online space, including fraud, harassment, or does the common law sufficiently address some of these challenges, as in the now widely publicized Lendell Simmons case? Although I do believe that was a civil case.
Yeah, that was a civil case, and that goes in the category of like sextortion in that sense. And in the proposed draft bill, it contained an area in there that sought to address that particular, but currently it does not offer any protection where it comes to an adult. The Children's Act covers the kids, our kids, but it doesn't cover in terms with adult, and it still falls within the civil realm where that is concerned. In terms of general trends, it's just a different space. It's just as though you step out of this room into another area where the language is different in terms of ones and zeros, but the same modus operandi is being purported there. Like, say, like in an incident where a fraud situation is happening, phishing, for example, and someone trying to convince you that to hand over this cash to receive some more cash and stuff like that, is the same way someone would meet you physically and try to conduct that fraudulent aspect. So it's just really a change in space. So it's same mens rea. The actus reus wouldn't be different just based on the location in that sense, cyberspace and the physical realm.
So whether or not it's computer enabled, if the law is broken after the enablement through the computer system,
correct,
the law still applies.
Correct, still applies.
Not a bad bush lawyer. Can we have closing comments from Mr. Smith and then Superintendent Sylvester, please?
In the context of cybersecurity, now there's a number of fundamental areas we have to cover as a country from a national perspective. We have a 2012 strategy which we actually want to update in the context. We have embarked upon a project to try and update the strategy to make it modern, to update it in the context of the various elements of protection, measures to treat with cybersecurity issues from a management perspective. Let's look at it from that way, looking at incident response, education, awareness, legislation. The strategy covers all those areas. Right now, we just need to kind of improve it or update it in essence and going forward, so that we could now create a framework that could holistically cover everything in the context from AI, all these new threats in essence, when we look at things like cyber terrorism, extremism, human trafficking, online child protection, all these areas must be covered within a framework. Additionally, looking at how we treat with cyber resources, having standards, having policies, those things are fundamentally important for us to ensure that we could build a more robust cyber framework in essence for the country. So I just wanted to say that those are some of the things that we really need to push forward with, and those are the things that, one, the CSIRT tries to implement in essence, but at the end of the day, we still need the overarching agency or governance, and governance is important. And I think in the last session you mentioned about the agency. The agency is fundamentally what we are supposed to be under, which is the CSIRT. That is it's supposed to be our home in essence. That, for various reasons, didn't come to fruition. Is one of the things that, going back in the strategy now, we want to make sure and bring forward as one of the work elements of the new strategy, to create the agency, to create that governance framework, so that we could now push forward with a lot of the measures that we require to make cybersecurity holistic in essence. So that's really what I would want to say in closing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Smith, and also to your colleague, Mr. Beechwood. Can we have closing comments from Superintendent Sylvester, please?
In closing, comments, I would say that Trinidad and Tobago Police Service didn't enforce ideas or ideals, we enforce legislation and laws. We need laws and effective laws to be able to put and bring some level of confidence in terms of the digital incidents taking place in our country. And we can only do so if we have persons coming together and giving us that legislation, so that we can speak to the foreign countries and our foreign counterparts to get work taking place on the ground. We have too many incidents taking place, and without some form of guidance in the form of laws, we are unable to do anything.
Thank you. That was as politically correct as you can get. Persons coming together to pass the laws. We'd like to thank you all for being with us. We'd also like to thank Senator the Honorable Hassel Backus, Minister of Digital Transformation, and his team for being with us earlier on. Thank you all fellow committee members, staff of the Office of the Parliament, all stakeholders who met with the committee today. But certainly last but by no means least, the viewing and listening audience, and those of you who contributed through questions and or comments. On behalf of the Secretariat, we'd like to thank them also, certainly because of their yeoman service and support they give this committee and others throughout the Parliament. And we wish you a season's greetings, Merry Christmas, and all the best for a happy, safe, and productive 2024. Our meeting is now adjourned.